Well, what are your plans?
I haven't decided yet.
Excellent. What are some of the factors that would lead you that?
There's only one. Can we beat Obama? Is there somebody that can do it? If there isn't, then I'll consider running. If there is, I'll be satisfied.
So far, what are you seeing?
Right now, I don't know. I don't know. I can't tell you.
It's too early, or?
It is, sure. This election has developed very, very late. I mean, I think there's only been one real debate. In 2007, there have already been 4 at this time, maybe 5. And so none of these candidates that I just saw the pictures of had a chance to really develop their ideas, their thinking. So that'll be, I mean, there are a lot of other things that go into it, personal things, and how do you think you have a good chance of winning. But the main one will be, do I think that we have a good chance of defeating Obama, or do I think I would have a better chance of defeating him? Because I think it is critical that we have a different president in 2013 for this country to start growing again. Obama has held back our growth unlike any American president in 100 years.
How has he done that specifically? I mean, obviously, there
well,
were 2.5 wars anyway. And
maybe it's easier to look at the results, right? And then because otherwise it sounds extremely partisan. We haven't had unemployment at this high rate this long since the Great Depression. No American president has presided over a longer period of high unemployment than Barack Obama. That includes Jimmy Carter, and it includes John F. Kennedy and the Bushes. And he took over an economy that was in trouble, and now it's in crisis. Right? He took it from trouble to crisis, instead of from trouble to turning it around and straightening it out. I took over an economy in New York City that was in a lot of trouble. It was 10.5% unemployment. It was a $2.4 billion deficit, 400,000 lost jobs, 1.1 million people on welfare, and within 3 or 4 years, that economy had turned around. Eventually, our unemployment went down to 5.5%. We gained 500,000 jobs. We moved welfare down from 1.1 million to 500,000. Our population grew. My policies had definable results. His policies have had definable results. It's a disaster. And so we have to change it. We have to change the direction of the country. We have to reinvigorate the private sector rather than invigorating government and growing government.
How does the government do that, though? I mean,
get out of the way. Get out of the way. Government should get out of the way. They should stop directing everything, trying to decide everything. It should stop having the arrogant and unrealistic view that we can plan everything. This is what brought Eastern European governments down, central planning. It's the worst possible thing you can do in a free society. Price controls make prices go up. Right? The reality is that President Obama has the wrong economic philosophy for America. It's a totally contrary to philosophy to what made America the greatest and most dynamic economy in the history of the world, which is de-emphasize government, overemphasize the private sector. De-emphasize central planning, overemphasize millions of individual decisions. Use market economics to bring prices down rather than central planning. And he doesn't, I just don't think he believes in it. I mean, it's as simple as that. I mean, even when he gets forced to do it, he doesn't really want to do it. Because I think he has the mentality of a central planner in large government, social democracy model, like in Europe. And unless we change that, we're going to just be fooling ourselves. Our economy, which wants to recover, has wanted to recover for a year, is not recovering because it's being burdened by incredible debt, which he escalated more than any American president ever. Tremendous amount of decision-making now being taken into Washington. And we're scheduled for a lot more to happen in the next 3 to 4 years because his healthcare disaster hasn't even really happened yet. And that's going to mean, if we're worried about, and I am, about Washington regulating too much, because he's doing an awful lot by government regulation because he can't get it through Congress any longer. You've got environmental regulations that are crippling our ability to produce energy. Um, Regulations in healthcare are going to become an absolute disaster.
What do you think? Are there some specific changes in, say, the tax code or corporate tax and personal income
Well,
tax?
I think the first thing that could be done would be major reduction in the corporate tax.
Mm-hmm.
I think that as well as incentives for repatriating money.
We explain that a little bit.
Well, a lot of money has been invested offshore over the last 10, 12 years because of the tax rates. I mean, a lot of the insurance business moved, to Bermuda. A lot of pharmaceutical industry, factories in Eastern Europe, factories in Ireland.
Isn't that more because of labor cost? I mean, not more, but at least
some of it is tax.
Equally.
Some of it is tax. I mean, look. You can get pretty good labor costs in the South. Look at the big dispute Boeing is in right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the state of Washington and the state of South Carolina.
Right.
South Carolina looks pretty good. There are parts of America where you can have very competitive labor situation. You're not going to get very competitive labor situation in the Northeast and the far West because of the large cost of government there. Right. But in the South and the Southwest, Southeast, you can still get tremendously competitive labor costs. So you can move a lot of those businesses back to it. You can move a lot of that back to America. And some of it is just plain old investment. I mean, it isn't even labor, it's just investment that's being driven overseas.
I want to just go back to if I were President Obama and I heard you say, get out of the way and turn it over to the private sector, I would say, well, we did that and we had the private sector greed and the biggest calamity we've ever seen in recent
Totally
history.
wrong.
And that's going to be his answer.
That'll
Can't
be his
trust
answer.
the private sector.
That'll be his answer, but that's a total fictitious analysis of the economic meltdown of 2007, 2008. That meltdown was caused by government, not by the private sector. That meltdown was entirely caused by government. The private sector played its role, but it was a reactive role rather than the initial role. The reason for that meltdown were the millions and millions of mortgages given to people who couldn't afford mortgages. That was directed by the government. There's a recent book written by a New York Times reporter pointing out the fallacy of Obama's thinking. The New York Times doesn't quite write it that way, but if you read the book,
Gretchen.
Yeah, if you read the book, it's pretty clear that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and Chris Dodd and Barney Frank are the major causes of the economic meltdown. Even the derivatives that were created, the base product, were the undercapitalized mortgages, the phony mortgages. Mm-hmm. So, yes, the banks took advantage of it. Wall Street took advantage of it, but the whole process was set about by government. A bank is not on its own going to loan money to somebody who can't repay the loan. I mean, they're not going to do that unless the government either requires them to do that or incentivizes them to do that, and that's exactly what the government did. The government pushed them into an area of economic thinking that they would not have thought about if it wasn't for Clinton's housing policies, then carried forward by Barney Frank, Chris Dodd, Johnson, the guy who ran Fannie Mae. I mean, all those things are the key to it. And here's the really odd thing. So now we have this tremendous economic crisis, the proximate cause of which are junk mortgages. And Dodd-Frank has nothing to do with junk mortgages. It has to do with regulating the financial industry, and they're all worried about regulating hedge funds, and hedge funds play no role in it at all. Hedge funds can be good or bad, honest or dishonest, that's a different issue. They had nothing to do with the financial meltdown.
Well, except I think the trading of the bad mortgages, bundled.
But that was those were actually basically in very heavily regulated financial institutions. The institutions that went down or almost went down are all heavily regulated. Hedge funds aren't regulated. And most of that was happening in your major banks, right, which got all the stimulus money, or in Lehman Brothers and institutions that were heavily regulated.
You earlier mentioned the national debt. what would your solutions be to the problems with the budget crisis, and would you
The
consider?
budget crisis is a crisis of a government that's too large and extracting more money from the population than is healthy for our economy, and a government that is completely inefficient. So I would cut down the size of government dramatically. If we reduced the federal government by 15 or 20%, including the entitlement programs, by massive amounts, nobody would feel the difference because the spending is so darn inefficient. You wouldn't feel it. It wouldn't matter. If the Department of Education, as Ronald Reagan would say, was gone tomorrow, it would have no impact on the education of a single child in the United States, because they have no impact on the education of a single child in the United States, except to impose regulations that make it more difficult to really educate the child properly. I mean, most of what Washington does is inefficient. Here's how I learned that. As the mayor of New York, and there's a choice of who's going to collect the taxes, Washington or New York City or New York State. If Washington collected a tax from New York City, I was lucky if I saw back into the New York economy 20 or 30% of that, because of the inefficiency of sending money to Washington. Because by the time it gets back, it's been discounted 60 or 70 or 80%. So instead of Washington subsidizing my programs, I would have been much better off if Washington reduced the taxes on my citizens, let me tax them at a much lower rate, and carry out those services, because I wouldn't have had the inefficiency of having that money have to flow through, a massive bureaucracy that you're supporting with that. So I think Ronald Reagan used to describe it as devolution. We should reduce the functions of the federal government, and we should move those functions back to local government. It'll get done more efficiently, or move those functions to the private sector, where they'll get done even more efficiently than local government.
Do you think the federal government should adopt a balanced budget amendment?
I do. I didn't always think that, because I really thought for years that we would come to the point where we would have a balanced budget. I almost felt vindicated by that, because for a short while we did, with Clinton and Newt Gingrich. It was a nice tension, a nice combination of a Democratic president who was willing to move to the middle, and a Republican Congress that was willing to work with him. Even though they closed the government once and they fought a lot, they ended up probably with some of the best collaboration that we've had in a very long time, and we ended up with a surplus for a while. Since even the Bush administration, that's been out of control.
Well, that wasn't, though, I mean, that wasn't achieved through a balanced budget amendment. That was just an
No, that's
actual
what I'm saying.
balanced budget,
No,
right? So
what I'm saying is, I was never really convinced we had to have a balanced budget amendment. I felt vindicated by that because of what happened during the Clinton Newt Gingrich situation. But now, it seems to me that we don't have that discipline anymore.
I see, yeah.
And we need that discipline imposed on us from the outside. Somebody's got to discipline us to spend what we're supposed to spend, instead of thinking that money, you can just print money, which is what we do.
But in states that have it, there always seems to be wiggle room and
There is
loopholes.
wiggle room, but at least it gets you within some kind of ballpark that makes sense. I had a balanced budget requirement in New York City, and it helped. It didn't mean that we didn't wiggle a little bit, but we could only wiggle a little bit. We couldn't get totally out of control.